everyone. It's a very small budget update because actually we have very little news since last week when we had a budget update. There's no news on state aid. There's no news on TRS was final. So really what I wanted to talk mainly is about the status quo and the Princeton plan. As you can see, basically the numbers are the same as of February 24th. Nothing changed much. We had a couple of more budget meetings with Joe, with Laura. The numbers are basically the same. What probably the board wants to, next please. Princeton is exactly the same, basically very little change. Next please. And here is the preliminary budget based on the status quo. And I underline or put in red the fund balance, which is something that is the only thing that we can move at this point, and is for the board to decide if we want to increase the fund balance, decrease it, and then you can see an increase in the fund balance. What will it do on the tax levy? And for your information, 1 point in the tax levy represents $463,000. So let's say that the board wants to say, well, we want the tax levy is too high. I want the tax levy to be around 6%. Then Greg, can you change that 1,200, that $1,000,002 to $1,000,008?
All right. Well, we can. We have good news is we have a meeting next week. So what we can do is put together some different projections and alternatives and show what the differences would be. But Enrique, if you want to go back to this one.
The portion that we can change is the fund balance. Or let's say that the board wants to bring down the proposed tax levy from 6.6% to 5.6%. Then we will add $436,000 to the fund balance. Instead of having a fund balance of $1.2 million, we will have a fund balance of $1.6 million. So that's the idea. The idea is for the board first to make a decision if we want to go to the Princeton plan or not, and if the board decides not to go to the Princeton plan and wants to reduce the tax levy, how much would it cost in fund balance? How much we will have to put in fund balance to reduce the tax levy? So, but this is not for free. Any fund balance that we put this year, it's fund balance that we are not going to be able to put in the next following years. The good news,
so it'll have impact down the line if we use that fund balance now, right?
Well, it's not like the money, we'll get back that money. That money is gone. The good news is that this year we're doing well, and I'm hoping to have a fund balance of about $2.5 million. So we actually have some wiggle room to increase the fund balance if the board wants to do it.
What's our average fund balance in an average year when we go forward? What do we usually expect to have as a fund balance?
As fund balance moving forward is $1.2 million.
No, you just said that this year we have a fund balance of 2.5 that we can apply to next year. What's our regular fund balance at the end of a year? You know, there's always a little bit of wiggle room in our budget so that if there are unexpected expenses, and some years we have more left over than others.
Usually, it really depends on the year. For example, obviously last year it was $4.5 million because we were closed 5 months. So that was the exception. But usually we're talking also between $2 and $3 million. So we are in target. Some years is very, very little, either because there's lawsuits or unforeseen expenses. But I will say in an average year, it's about $2 million. And I will say this has been an average year because we have spent a lot of money in teachers, in PP&E, but on the other hand, we have underspent in oil, gas, coaches, etc., etc. So again, not a normal year, but we can expect that for the end of the year. As of today, we have $10.6 million in our fund balance. So if we decide not to do anything about increasing the fund balance for next year, I'll say we'll have about $12 to $13 million by the end of this school year.
And potentially if we reduce, if we're still in sort of COVID time, but we're reducing distance and we need extra equipment, which are not being reimbursed for, we may need some of our extra fund balance for that as we might whittle away our fund balance. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions about this preliminary budget under the status quo?
Anybody have questions?
I think that it is important also to look at the required reduction to meet contingent budget, because that's a very important issue that I want to discuss with the board. If the community decides that the proposed budget is too much and we go into contingent budget, the maximum that we can increase our budget is 2.1%. So our budget will be $81.1 million. That means that we will have to reduce $3 million, close to $3.1 million in expenses. And for us to reduce $3.1 million in expenses, it means to reduce 25 teachers, principals, everything. I mean, $3.1 million. Just imagine our average teacher makes about $100,000. And again, you're not cutting in the middle, you're cutting the low ones. If you add all their benefits and everything, let's say that it's 100,000. That means that would be 31 teachers. And again, it's not only going to be teachers. And we have 250 teachers. So we're talking 10% of our teachers. So this is an important concept that I just want to express it so people understand what would happen if the budget doesn't pass.
Yeah, that's certainly a very important point. Are you going to talk about the Princeton preliminary, or do you want me to make observation between the two before I do that?
Let's talk about it, and then you can talk about it. So, Greg, next one, please. In the Princeton plan, basically all the numbers are the same, but the fund balance, in this case, we are expecting to put less of a fund balance because I want to try to avoid peak and valleys in the tax levy going forward. So in this case, with only $350,000 of fund balance, our proposed tax levy will be 4.3%. let's say that we want to lower it to 3.3%, then it will be about $800,000 of fund balance, because again, every $430,000 represent 1.1% in the tax levy.
And in both of these charts, you haven't taken into consideration any reductions at the middle school, correct?
Correct. Here, the only difference are the, I think, and I don't remember, but the 7 to 8 teachers that we will have to reduce in the Princeton plan.
We've heard numbers as high as 14 teachers. Are you only calculating in 7 to 8 teachers in this number?
Let me jump in. Those are classroom teachers, because those are directly affected with the K-12. I'm sorry, the K-5 shift in class sizes. The others are art, music, so on and so forth from the what was shared before, and we can share that again next week as well. And if I could, I just want to weigh in on something. It was a topic that came up at yesterday's discussion about why it's important to pass a budget. And it's important to pass a budget for many, many reasons. One is to have more revenue in order to support existing programs. And about 10 years ago-ish, Lori and Mary Pat will have the specific year, I'm sure, one of our budgets failed. And we had, I don't know what year, 2007, I thought, 2006 or 7. I may have it wrong, but a budget failed and we had to reduce our staff by about 30 people. And it took a really long time for the district to have the revenue back again in order to bring those positions back into the budget. And I shared some information with our community yesterday, and I want to give updated information. We have just shy of 14,000 registered voters in our school district. If you look at our enrollment of around 2,300 students and assume that every child has a mom and dad that lives in our district and would vote for the budget because they support public schools, and let's just say those yes votes are baked in. So out of 14,000 total registered voters, we would have 4,600 yes votes, and we would still have a long road to haul in order to make sure that we had a majority. So I share that because we are one of the few we're one of the few communities in Westchester that has a majority of its residents, particularly voters, that no longer have kids in the district. And so that's why supporting the schools is really, really important for us, because a majority of the folks that pay taxes to our school district no longer have kids utilizing the services. So when we talk about trying to drive down the tax increase and trying to right size the organization or tightening the belt, that is a discussion with the full community, because they are also looking at ways or asking us to find ways to keep the tax burden down, so that if they're on fixed income or aging in place, or they just don't have kids in the district, that it's still affordable for them to live here. So, you know, preparing a school budget is not just a communication to families and students and parents. It's got to be to the entire district. And we are one of, again, very few districts in Westchester that have such a significant portion of our population that no longer or never have had kids in our district.
Thank you. Does anybody have questions for Enrique on either the Princeton plan projections or the other projection or comparisons there too?
So just to recap a little bit for me, the main difference right now in these projections that we're seeing would be the amount of fund balance that would be using. I mean, in addition, I mean, that would be one of the main things that we would be looking at, is how much fund balance to use. And so like with the status quo, we would be using 1.2 million of our fund balance, but with this one, with the Princeton plan, it'd be 350,000. That's quite a significant difference.
Yes, I agree. But going forward, in some years, the fund balance from the Princeton plan will be a lot bigger than the fund balance from the comparable status quo. Again, at the end of the 8 years, we're expecting to use in both cases, for comparison basis, the same total amount of fund balance. So I'm not saying, well, you know, I'm going to have more fund balance in Princeton plan than in this one. So I need to compare apples with apples. So at the end of the 10 years, I have used the exact amount of fund balance in each of the two. So I can compare and tell the community how much the tax levy is going to be under each of the two cases. So again, in this particular year, for the Princeton plan, it was 4.3. So what I was trying to do is the Princeton plan, look at my average in the 10 years, that was around 4.5%. And every year, based on my projections, add or subtract fund balance. So one year is not an increase of 1% and the other one an increase of 7%. So try to be within a band of 4.5%. In the case, if we move to status quo, Greg, please. Greg?
Who are you looking for?
The other one, the other way around. Yeah, there. So here, what I'm trying to do is our average for the status quo over the 10 years is about 6%, 6.5%. So I'm trying every year to increase or decrease fund balance, so I don't have also the peak and valleys, and I'm around the 6 to 6.5%.
Corey?
I just have a quick question. Enrique, I know you've done a great job with these numbers and all these estimates, and there's a lot that goes into it. Has any third party or independent party verified the assumptions and calculations that we've got here?
Yes, the
Okay.
state controller.
The state controller, great.
The state controller last year just came to look at this, to see how we're going to be able to handle the reduction in pilots. And I spent days, months with them, explaining them my assumptions, and basically they agreed with everything. They thought that I was a little bit aggressive with fund balance, but what they forgot is that our debt profile will decrease over these 10 years. So even though I explained it at the end of the meeting, they said, that's fine, but we just don't want to change it. But they looked at it, and the report is in the state controllers, and it was a very good report, and they validate basically all the numbers.
Great. So then the other question I have is, we were talking about, was it 1.2 versus 350,000 on whether we do the Princeton plan. We've been talking about, over 2 million of savings doing the Princeton plan, but the budget difference in the fund balance is only 900,000. So why is that? Why is there a discrepancy between the two?
Well, one of the points is, again, the number of teachers that I was given of reductions.
Wait, I think we're missing a point, Corey. The percentage of your tax levy increase would be less under this Princeton plan preliminary budget than it would be under the status quo preliminary budget, right? So your
Okay,
tax
so the
levy
overall
increase,
expenses, so the expenses would be lower, and that's going to make the difference, right? So then we would
Right.
have a 1.1 million or $900,000 difference there, right?
Right.
Is that the difference? I'm just explaining. We talked about these numbers a lot. I think people are going to have those questions, so I'm just
Well,
asking them.
But
Make
that
sure
part
that
is in
people are
on the
clear.
proposed budget. Under the status quo, the
Yeah.
proposed budget is 84.2. Greg, please move to the Princeton. And here is 82.3. So that's your 2
So
million.
that's the difference, right? So the difference is not in the fund balance. The difference is in our overall tax levy.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. If I put the same amount, then the difference is going to be that in Princeton, instead of being 4.3%, it's going to be about 2% compared to 6.6 for the status quo.
Right.
But
If we did the 1.2 for the Princeton as well, is that what? Am I
No, the
missing?
1.2 for the
yes, Lori.
yeah.
Yes, what?
Yes, if you did 1.2 million in fund balance for both the status quo
Both of them,
and the
right.
Princeton plan preliminary budget, then you'll have a 4% difference in your tax levy.
Right.
But we don't want to
necessity
do that
between the two.
because you're dipping into your savings effectively, right? So
No,
unless you really have to.
like I said, because then you are at 2%, but maybe next year
Right.
you will be at 6%, because at the end of the day, the average over the next 10 years is going to be around 4%. So anything that is below your average, the next year has to be, or at one point it has to be way above the average, to make it the average.
Right. You don't want to borrow from Peter to pay Paul.
Exactly.
You want to average it out as much as you can over the life of.
At a steady
Right.
increase. I think that someone will prefer to have their taxes increase 4% every year, that 2% one year and 6% the following.
Right. It's going to be more stable, at least, and more predictable. And I think predictable just makes it easier for people. But 4% is a far cry from the 12% that we were originally talking about.
Sure.
So I think we also have to put it into perspective in that way, in that, you've all made some really great progress in getting this down to something that's manageable for people. And I think, based on the calculator that we talked about earlier, I think it would be good for people to see what it's actually going to mean to them dollar-wise.
Yes.
Right, and for the public, Enrique was hoping to have a 10-year projection calculator for the presentation tonight, but I think it's not coming out. Well, Enrique's figuring that out. We're hoping to have this online so that you can actually put your assessed value for your home in the calculator and find out how much you would pay in an increase every year, and then how much you would save over 10 years if we did Princeton plan versus the status quo. So that would give you a better idea of where the savings are. And this, of course, is just an estimate. We're using what assumptions from today, and that could change over time, but I think that would be a useful figure. I think we all thought that would be a useful figure for the public to have.
So here you have for the community to see exactly how much their taxes will go up comparing one to the other one. So in this particular case, you have a house with an assessed value of $10,000.
Wait, Enrique, can you explain what assessed value of your house is versus the actual taxes you're paying, so that if people want to use the calculator, they know what they're doing?
Sure. The assessed value is based on what Town of Portland tells your house is worth as a percentage of the total market value of the house. So it's not the market value, not even close, but it's a percentage of the market value. So when they decide how much to tax a house, they will compare a house that has five rooms with another house that has 5 rooms, and that's the assessed value. If you look at your tax bill at the very left, you are going to see how they call it assessed value. And Town of Cortland, the assessor, taxes you based on that assessed value. What that assessed value is trying to do in our community, that we have 2 different jurisdictions, the city of Peekskill and the town of Cortland, is they try to say, okay, if this house in Peekskill is worth X and this house in Cortland is worth W, I'm going to look at the assessed value and to be sure that they are comparable so I can tax them relatively the same. So it's important for you to look at your tax bill or to call Town of Cortland to see what's your assessed value. For references for everyone, the average assessed value in the Henry Hudson community is $7,700. So that's your average in both city of Peekskill and town of Cortland. So Greg, in the first 10,000, if you change it to 7,700, then can you make it a little bit bigger so people can see it? Good. So as you can see, for this year, town of Cortland, someone who has an average house would have paid $8,300 in town of Cortland and $4,000 in Peekskill. And obviously, because there's no, current or Princeton, it's the same for both years. So if we go for next year, under the assumptions that I showed you previously, you can see that for the current program, you will be paying, if you are in town of Cortland, average house, $8,800, $8,900 compared to $8,700, with a difference of $198 for town of Cortland house and $97 for town of Peekskill. If we go to the right, every year I'm doing exactly the same based on what I believe it's going to be our tax increases in both of the systems. So if we go, Greg, to the right, go to the end, so you can go one by one. But here on the total, you can see that in 10 years, someone who's going to be in the house, it's going to be paying $129,000 in taxes over the 10 years under the status quo, compared to $123,000 compared to if we were to go to the Princeton plan. The same is the same in city of Peekskill. So the total difference in taxes that someone in town of Cortland will pay over the 10 years is $5,500, and in Peekskill is $2,745. To make it, now let's, Greg, if you go instead of putting 7,700 there, you put 17,000. And go to the end. Then, for example, someone with an assessed value of 17,000 will be paying 284,000 compared to 272,000, an increase of $12,000 over the 10 years. And in the case of City of Peekskill, 148 compared to 142 with a difference of $6,000. And here is when you can compare apples with apples, because it's over the 10 years where the fund balance will be exactly the same, cessation fund and everything. So that is the bottom line of these projections. The only thing that changes in these projections are the fact that we're going to the Princeton plan or not. I'm not taking into account any other savings like the ones we were just discussing about the middle school. Because in both cases, if the board decides to reduce the teachers in the middle school, it will happen with or without Princeton plan.
Thank you, Enrique. Does anybody have any questions about this chart, about the tax calculator?
Well, how is it going to be available for people? Will it be on our site? So people.
I'm going to work with Laura and put it in if it's possible, put it in the website, and the only cell that you will be able to change is the one of the assessed value.
I think
Sure,
that would be
that's-
immensely
Yeah, this
Sure,
is
that's the
really
one they want.
very helpful.
Sure, that's the one they want. Very helpful. Thank
I
you.
know we've been asking for this for a while, so Enrique, thank you.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate you putting this together.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of numbers, but you know, definitely people will want to see what's going to happen in their next year to the next 10 years. And again, after 10 years, we're going to be back in the 2%. And even more importantly, after all these increases, if we move to the Princeton plan, our tax rates, our tax levy will be much lower than our neighboring districts. So even with these increases of 4%, our total payment of an exact house in any of our neighboring districts and Henry Hudson, our taxes are going to be lower for that house.
Enrique, I have a question. If you look at it from the perspective of if using the Princeton plan will be significantly lower, how will we compare if we keep it at the current programs? Will we be on par with others? Will we still be slightly over? Will we be slightly over? Will we be slightly under? How does that compare?
We will be at par, I will say, very close to par.
All right. So I think, again, the question I think people are looking at is, you know, they're going to look at the dollar value and see how this is going to impact their, you know, their personal obligations, but also, and compare that to, you know, the I guess, risk reward here. You know, it's like if it's worth, you know, that savings is worth whatever additional, whatever changes will happen in their life under the Princeton plan, whether it's, you know, additional schools or you know, further driving or whatever that adjustment is. Okay, thank you, because I think this is critical to put up so that people can just get a complete sense of, you know, and have a legit number of, and make that decision, you know how it's going to affect them and see if it's, you know, if you looked at purely on a financial, because there's so many more details besides just financial, but if you looked at it purely from a financial perspective, it gives them a number to work with.
Yes.
Yeah. And Enrique, when you put up the documents, can you also put up some guidance for people so they can see where the assessed value is on their home, on their tax bill, so
Yes.
they know exactly where to look?
maybe what I'll do is I'll ask Town of Cortland to send me a bogus or a form, and then
Yep.
circle assessed value. So when people want to see it, they can go to their own tax bill and look what they have to check. Yes.
That would be great.
That's
Thank
a
you.
very good idea. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions?
Just one thing. In talking with my husband about understanding what our assessed value was for our home, it's different than what your tax bill is too. I mean, it's different from even what the amount of school taxes you pay. It's a different number than what the assessed value is, if that's correct, right?
That
So
is
like,
correct.
you can't just look at what your school tax bill is and say that's my assessed value, because that's
No.
not correct.
Your
Yeah.
assessed value is based on your house value for all your taxes. So the assessed value for your taxes in Henry Hudson are the same as your assessed value for your taxes for Town of Cortland. So they use, for all the different taxations that you have, taxes that you have, the same assessed value. They use your assessed value also for the taxes you pay for the library. To give you an example, and probably you've never noticed in your taxes, but Town of Portland, our assessed value, our tax rate per 1,000 of assessed value is 1,082. So that means that for every $1,000 of assessed value that you have, you're paying $1,082. For the library, is $7 or $8 or $9 or $11 per 1,000 of assessed value, because their tax levy is only 400,000, 500,000 compared to $40 million for us. So that's what I'm saying. Assessed value is how Town of Portland values your house to pay for taxes. And every Town of Portland has a different tax rate than we do, and the library has a different tax rate than we do.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important to realize that if you try to plug in the amount that you're paying in school taxes, that's not going to be the correct number to put in here. It's going to be we have to find that assessed value, which isn't the same amount that you're paying actually in taxes.
That's what I'm saying. In taxes, you pay per 1,000 of assessed value.
The columns tell you
And,
how.
and
much
Lisa,
to
it's
pay in
listed, it's listed on your tax bill. So your tax bill will say, here is your dollar value of assessed value, here is the tax rate, and then here is what we're actually charging you. So there is a place on the receipt that Enrique can circle in a dummy and say, okay, here is where the assessed value is.
Perfect. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Enrique. I think it doesn't look like we have any more questions.
Great. Thank you.